Welcome to this video that will show you how to use HTML and JavaScript to have an HTML form along with some other HTML tags like a field set, legend, label, input, and then some JavaScript that will actually allow you to store that information into the form. You pull the information off of the form. You can open a brand new window in a browser and then retrieve that information into that new HTML file in a different tab in the browser. So first thing to do is create a brand new file and save that file as an HTML file. I saved mine as sampleinputs.html, and then go ahead and pause the video and type in this HTML. Make sure there's no errors in it, and if so, we'll just debug those as we move along. So go ahead and pause the video and type that in. Now that you've done that, create a brand new file and call it sampleoutput.html, and then go ahead and type in this information, this code, and then save that. Once you're done, come back over to the sample inputs file and we'll continue the video. Now that you've had the time to type in that code, let's go ahead and talk about what's happening and what it all means, and then we'll make sure you understand this, and hopefully you'll be able to fix any problems you have in your program also. So what we're going to do is we're going to work with an HTML form. Now, what is an HTML form? When you actually use an HTML form in a browser, what happens is the browser sends a request to the web server or the host that holds or stores your HTML page. The web server then returns that HTML page that has your HTML form on it. So this is stored somewhere out in a server, whether it's Discount ASP or some host that's storing all your web pages. Maybe even it's the BYU domain. And then the server, when somebody tries to see this file, they type that file in the URL for the browser. The server sends this file to the browser, and in that file it actually has what we call an HTML form. So what happens is in that HTML form, it acts like a container that holds HTML tags. In other words, I guess you could say it's an object that holds an array of all the other objects, all these HTML objects. And that's what the DOM does for us. And then this is where users can type in information. In fact, let's go ahead and run this website first so you can see what happens, and then we'll go back and discuss the code that happens. So now that you've typed in all that code, hopefully you don't have any errors. If so, you'll have to debug those. I'm going to go ahead and open this form, and the first thing it does, let me point things out, is it displays this form, this HTML page. It displays a box around two input fields, and that box title is student information, and the input fields are represented by the first name and the last name. And then also notice that the cursor is blinking in first name, because that HTML input field has focus right now. Or in other words, if you start typing, that's what gets displayed in this box. And then outside of that little box there, but still in the form for the HTML, we have a label that says favorite color, and we have a little color picker field, and then we have a store button. So let's see what happens if we type some data in. I'll type Greg and Anderson, and then I'll click on this favorite color, which brings up a color dialog. I'll choose red and click OK, and then I'm going to click store. Now let's see what happens when we click store. A brand new tab is opened up. We display Greg Anderson, and we display it in the color that was selected back over to here. So somehow when the user clicks on this button, we must send this information from this form on this HTML page to a brand new form, a brand new HTML page, and display that and change some of the attributes about it. So how do we do that? Let's take a look at the code and see if we understand it. The first part, of course, is simple. Our doc type HTML5, HTML tags, and body tags. Now here's where we start to have fun. Let's take a look at the HTML first. Now the way you create a form container in HTML is you simply type the word form, give it a name and an ID, close off that tag, and then that will create your ending tag, and this now becomes a container for fields that the user will interact with. Maybe it's a text field, a radio button, a checkbox, a drop-down list, buttons, a text area, a color picker, a file picker, a password, a file name. There's a bunch of different inputs that you can work with on a form. And forms just allow a user to interact with the HTML web page and type in data or choose data. So this form will be a container. It has an ID of inputs and a name of my form. The next thing I did is I created what we called a field set. Now the field set was the square box around the inputs. In other languages it's called a group box. The legend is the text that shows up on the field set. Let me show that to you one more time. Also realize on that field set I said style width equals 0 pixels. Watch what happens. I'm going to get rid of that size and let's just go ahead and run it one more time and take a look. So here is the field set. Do you see this big box? It also acts as a container. And since I didn't put the style and the width size, it tries to go for the width of the entire browser. And then here is the legend information. If you pop back and look at your code, you'll see the legend says student information. So it's a group box that allows us to organize information on a web page. In other words, a field set says any type of HTML tags that are related, let's put them into a field set and we can build little boxes around them. Some people like the look, some people don't. Let me run it one more time, and now I want you to see that field set with the style width of 0 pixels, and once again remember there's the legend. So that's the text that displays in the box of a field set. And then you put tags inside of that field set, below the legend and inside the field set. And that allows us to have different inputs that we can work with. Let's run that one more time and see what that style width colon 0 pixel did. Now it says just go ahead and make the box for the size of the inputs along with the margins that it has. So that makes it look a little bit nicer. Next thing, we then created a label tag. A label tag is used to connect a label to an HTML input. And they allow us to clean up the information on our web page. And the nice thing is, since it's a label tag, that means an object is created for it in the DOM. So we now have access for it. So that label element is used to associate a label, a text label, with a form input field. And it's a descriptive text that tells users what they should type in. For example, we said, here's a label. We're going to link it to, or it is for, the ID on the form called first name. And the text that we're going to display for the user to see will be first name. And then we close off that label. Here's an input form. This input form allows us to get text information from the user. In other words, by specifying the type text, that will create a box and the user can type in information. Look at the different types that we have. We can do buttons, checkboxes, color pickers, date time local, email, file, hidden tags, image, month, number, password, radio, ranges, a reset tag, search, submit, telephone, text, time, URL, week. That's a lot of different tags that it can be. And this attribute for the input specifies what it's going to look like and how it's going to work. We're going to go ahead and just leave that as a text, which says it will be a square box that the user can type in values and it comes back as a string. That square box will have an ID of first name and a name of first name. But look what you can do with that input. You can specify autofocus. That's why when we first run our program, our web page, the cursor is sitting inside of that form waiting for you to type something. You see the I-bar that's sitting there flashing? That's because that field has focus. And so you could say autofocus, and that would be the first one that the user will work with. What if I put autofocus on the last name? Let's save that, run it one more time. Okay, think what's going to happen, and let's see if it does. Yep, the cursor is now sitting there. As I press the Tab key, these objects receive focus. Shift-Tab goes backwards through the focus list. So that attribute, autofocus, allows you to specify which control will be the one the user will first interact with. Then we have a couple of breaks, another label. This time we said this label is for the last name ID. There's the text that shows up on the form. And then here's another input, and it's last name. So this matches or is linked with this label. And it's a way that you can create an object for the text that's being displayed. And then you can use the DOM to grab that information if you needed to. So that's the explanation of what the field set does with the legend, a label, and an input type. Let's take a look at the next input type we want to work with. I created another label. I said link it to an ID called Fave Color. There's the text that's going to be displayed, and then here's an input, and this time we said this input is not a text input, but it is a color picker. In other words, it's going to pop up a window and allow you to choose a color. We specified the ID and the name, issued a couple of breaks. Then we specified a button, the text that shows up on the button, the ID of the button, and if you ever click on the button, what JavaScript function should you go execute? So when you run this one more time, you're going to see an HTML form displayed with a group box or a field set with the student information label inside of it, which is a legend, the first name label, the first name input with autofocus, the second name label, the second input for last name. Here's our favorite color label and a color picker, and then the button. So let's go ahead and type in Greg Anderson, tab. Watch what happens when I click on the input color. It now displays a pop-up window, and you can choose a color and click OK. And then if you click on the Store button, that says go execute the process form JavaScript function. Well, here's the process form JavaScript function. So let's take a look at the JavaScript function we have. First of all, notice that we have it in our script tag, opening and closing script tags. We then said it's a function, and we gave it the name process form. That matches the name that we specified on our button, that if they ever clicked on the button, go execute the expression or the function process form. Within this function, I created 3 variables. Usually I put those over multiple lines, but I went ahead and put them on one line so you can see all of the HTML and JavaScript. The 3 variables, one will contain the first name, the last name, and whatever color they selected. Now remember, all the information that comes out of these inputs are going to be string information. We then said go to the variable and go out to the DOM. And on that DOM, go access the form, that HTML form we just made. Now remember, the HTML form acts like a container. It will hold other HTML objects or tags that are inside of that form. So we said access the form in the DOM, go find the form called inputs, because it looks like you could have multiple forms in one HTML file. Go find the form for inputs. This is acting like an array now. And then on that form, inputs, go find the ID, or the name is what we're really working with, the name, first name. And then grab the value out of it. So this says go to the DOM, go to the form inputs, which is this form right here, find the input, or find the tag that has the name, first name, which is right here, and that's an input of type text, and then grab the value out of it and store it to first name. Let's do the same thing for the last name, and do the same thing for the fave color, or the color picker. So now this variable has the first name that the user typed in, the last name the user typed in, and the color that the user selected. And let's go ahead and run that in the debugger and make sure that it works. So we'll go ahead and start our browser. We'll press Control-Shift-I, and we'll set a breakpoint right on this line, so all these others will be executed. Let's type in Greg Anderson, and let's go choose a color. We'll choose red. OK. Click on Store, which says Run the Process Form. We then executed all this, and let's take a look at this in the debugger. When I put my cursor on Forms, and I can see in the debugger, here's Forms input. There's the field set, and all the attributes for the field set object. Here's the input for first name, the input for last name, the input for fave color, and the button store. Let's take a look at first name. Under first name, if I looked at the different attributes, that's a lot of information you can work with and that you can extract out of that object. There's the ID, which is first name, and so that's a lot of information for that form. And if I take a look at these variables, first name now has Greg, last name has Anderson, and color has $FF0000. Now you might not recognize that, but that's the color red. Because remember, every pixel that you display has RGB, which stands for red, green, and blue. And then you just specify the amount of red, the amount of green, and the amount of blue each pixel has. This one says it has a lot of red, because that's the first two positions, no green, and no blue. And those values go from 0 to 9, and then A through F, with F being the largest amount, and 0 being the least amount. So let's go ahead and stop this and go back and understand the rest of the code that happens. Now that you've seen that you can grab that information, we can actually work with a window object. Now the window object is actually a tab in the browser. And we said go open a brand new tab in that browser and go open up that HTML file into that browser tab. So a brand new window shows up. Next thing is we said let's go to a variable called local storage. Now local storage is an HTML5 feature that allows you to store information in a browser. We have two different types of storage. We have a local storage and a session storage. The local storage says it's going to keep information that you store in it until the browser window closes. Actually, even if the browser window closes, it's still there. There is no expiration date. You would think that you'd close a browser and it disappears, but it's not. It's almost like cookies. It might be available for a day, a week, a month, a year. We just don't know. But it's a great way that we can just store information. And so we could say local storage dot set item, which is a method. And then you give it a brand new name of where you want to store the information. So it's almost like creating a brand new variable. And we said we want to store it in a key called new first name. And what do we want to store? The contents of that variable. And then we also want to store in a brand new key called new last name the contents of that variable. And we also want to store in a brand new key called new fave color the contents of that variable. Let's go over to the sample output HTML and see what happens. Now remember, we're storing the local storage and we're setting new items in there. In other words, we said in this memory location, create a new spot called new first name and store that. Create a new spot, store that. Create a new spot, store that. What does that mean we can do? Over in the sample output.html, we said that when this web page is loaded into memory, call that function. We also have a p tag with the idea of output. So when this page is loaded into memory, it actually says call this function. We create a variable and initialize it, and we say for that variable, let's go to local storage and get the key called new first name. And I concatenated it with the space, and I go to local storage, get the element that has the key of new last name. And that gets stored to soutput. And then I assign soutput to the inner HTML of the p tag output in the DOM. That's our document get element by ID, finds the ID output, grabs the inner HTML, stores the contents of the variable. Here's the other cool thing though. This says go to the DOM, call the method get element by ID output, so it grabs this p tag, and then it says access the style and then the color, which is our font color for that p tag. Notice you say the p tag dot style dot color, because color is an attribute of style, which is an attribute for the p tag, and assign it whatever was in the local storage with the key or the item called new fave color, and that was our color string. And so that's why when we actually run this program, let's see what happens. So we start with focus and first name. Let's type Mickey Mouse. Let's click red. Click OK. Click store. Remember, that's going to open up a brand new page. Grab the name, first name, grab the last name, concatenate them with the space, store them to the p tag and display it in the inner HTML, and then change the font color to be whatever color we selected here. And that's why Mickey Mouse shows up with red. So this is pretty exciting that through the use of HTML forms, it can contain other HTML objects, and it allows us to type in information for the user to interact with our web page. The field set makes a group box around information. The legend is the title in that field set. The label is a title for an input, and you've seen an input for text and an input for a color picker. You've also seen how you can specify a specific field to have focus when the page is first displayed. Then we have a button that if the user ever clicks on it, we tell it to execute a JavaScript function. We've now seen that the DOM stores a form object based upon a name, and that form object acts as a container for all the other HTML objects on the form. And we can grab the value out of those objects. We've also seen that in JavaScript we can open up a brand new tab and we can load an HTML page. And then we can store information inside of our browser, which will be alive out there and just wait for us. And it's almost like a data dictionary is what we call it, where it has a key and a value. And we use the key to look up the position of where the data is stored. Think of it maybe like an index. And so we say in our local storage for this browser, there's a position called new first name that has that value. And then we've seen that we can actually call a function when a HTML page is loaded into memory. And we can use that local storage and go get information that was stored in it based upon the key. And we can change the HTML tags through the DOM and using that local storage.